Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. With an overwhelming number of cryptocurrencies and digital assets on the market, investors can now get insight into investable assets that weren't previously on their radar with the CoinDesk 20. Galen Moore, senior research analyst at CoinDesk, joins me to discuss. Galen, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Great to be here, Jill. Thanks for having me.
All right, tell us a bit about the survey and the methodology behind it.
Sure. So I think you hit the nail on the head when it comes to sort of the motivation for why we're producing this list. There are some 5,000 assets out there. Many of them are defunct. Some of them may be scams. And it's, week to week, you can see unfamiliar assets sort of topping the list of assets by returns or market cap. And I think there's a desire among investors and among certainly the audience that we reach at CoinDesk to have a sense of what has more staying power in the market. What are some of the assets that are here today and might conceivably be here tomorrow? So that's the sort of the purpose for forming this methodology around the CoinDesk 20. And it's not an index; it's a list. These are the assets that have the most consistent volume in the market, and we're really trying to rate assets by volume on verifiable exchanges, and so that we end up with a list that doesn't end up sort of fluctuating day to day like some of the other lists that people use might do.
So Galen, let's talk about that when it comes to volume and the exchanges, because there is a lot of discrepancy. And with this survey, what have you learned about the exchanges? Is the industry as a whole getting better with these discrepancies?
No, I don't really think it is. The sort of fake volume problem rose to prominence in about the spring of 2019. One of the first places people began to read about it was in a report by Bitwise. And, we put together some studies on this we've been paying attention to this issue for some time. And the truth is, while there have been a number of, admirable and reasonable and rational efforts to get at what is the real volume of trade on crypto exchanges, I think, even the people behind those efforts would acknowledge that they're frequently imperfect, and really nobody has any idea what the volume of crypto trade is. The reasons for that are actually sort of baked into the infrastructure of crypto markets itself. So, for example, with equity exchange operators like ICE, they sell the data that they provide. In crypto markets, the data is provided free via API to anybody who wants to ingest it, and the markets themselves are motivated to bring more participants on because they earn revenue through fees on trading. So what you have seen in the past, and I think continue to see today in a list of rankings of exchanges by volume, is many exchanges that are pumping their volume with wash trading. So to sort of truly get at what the real volume figure is becomes very challenging. There are some of those exchanges that may have very little real volume, as Bitwise asserted back in last spring. But there are many exchanges that have significant real volume and liquidity, but then also may have some wash trading and fake activity going on as well. So for us in this asset list, being cognizant of those issues, we really wanted to take the most conservative approach possible. So we took 3 of those studies that I mentioned that have been done over the course of the year 2019. And in terms of the component exchanges that we would use to select assets by volume, we are only looking at exchanges that were vetted and cleared by all 3 of those reports. And those would be reports published by Bitwise, Digital Asset Research, and The Block.
So let's discuss the assets, because we're largely familiar with Bitcoin, but what about the other cryptocurrencies that make up the current CoinDesk 20?
Yeah, no, that's exactly, I think, what we would hope people would do, right? Is, we have a lot of people coming to CoinDesk for news and information about Bitcoin, Ethereum as well. And the top 5 or so assets, I think, are fairly well known to our audience. Ripple, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, whether you're sort of a proponent or in the camp of any of these assets, I think, they're all familiar to a sort of an educated crypto investor. Down the list, maybe less so. And I think especially over the past couple of quarters, we've seen a number of assets really outperform Bitcoin and some of the sort of top or blue chip assets, if you will, by pretty significant margins. I'm thinking of Chainlink, for example, or 0x. These are assets that, sort of an investor newer to the space might not be as familiar with. And I think, for us to be able to give a sense of, this really is something that does have a sort of a consistent level of interest from other investors is enough to make hopefully make that investor believe that it's worthwhile to invest the time it would take to get their heads around the asset and think about what it would take to actually trade it. So those are a couple examples of assets a little further down the volume ranking that are on there. We also have application tokens like the basic attention token, which was one of the early ICOs in 2017. We have privacy coins like Zcash, Monero, and Dash. And, I think one of the things we tried to do in that list as well is sort of bucket the assets, so we can say, okay, what's the sort of category we could put this in? Is it designed to be currency, such as Bitcoin? Is it designed to be sort of a software platform, such as Ethereum? Or, is it designed to be something else? And really, what is the kind of unique value proposition that each of those, succinct value proposition that each of those communities is putting forward?
Galen, and so that's really helpful because I don't think the general audience understands that digital assets can be used for different kinds of things. It's because we're familiar with Bitcoin, it doesn't mean all digital assets are like a Bitcoin, if you will, and that they are designed to do other things. And to wrap up here, do you think that we'll ever see something with the volume and the popularity and the familiarity with, like you said, with Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Bitcoin has taken a very limited and focused approach in terms of its development. It's really trying to be, one thing. And right now, I think that's best summed up as digital gold. So that's a concept that certainly is familiar to investors. I think even when it comes to sort of that meme or story, some of the other assets further down have not been as successful, maybe primarily because they haven't really hit on that one thing that they do well. Ethereum has moved from being a global computer to now people sort of talk about ETH is money and the basis of a DeFi system. So I do think some of the other assets further down the line have some work to do in terms of honing that narrative. But, I think, in terms of use of the asset, really none of these assets are in wide use at this point. This is all very early adopter stuff. Any investor participating here is participating on a speculative basis, right? Even Bitcoin is a sort of a speculative store of value, as Jerome Powell put it so well last year. So could one thing take over? Could one thing become bigger? I think if you saw one of these platforms really start to see a crossing the chasm into widespread adoption, you might certainly see that start to happen. And anybody who's working on any of these projects is really trying to crack that nut and figure out what that killer app would be.
Well, that opportunity is out there because there's a lot of growth in DeFi right now. That's for sure. Galen, thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.